Hey, Dave Melinda here, Positive Polarity Podcast. Hope things are going awesome for you. I got a question like I do every week. Sometimes it's rhetorical, sometimes it's not. But I have this question that's rhetorical, and we're going to dive into this today. And the question is, do you have a message to share, but don't know how exactly to share that message? And if you're a business owner, entrepreneur, sales professional, whatever you're doing right now in your life, chances are pretty darn good that you have a message. And a lot of times I run into people that don't know how to share that message. And there's this crazy thing called the internet, and there's this crazy thing called social media, and it kind of morphed into this crazy thing called podcasting. So I found a guy, and fortunately he's from Wisconsin, so it makes it even way cooler. So Nick Nalbach, how are you today?
I am doing well, Dave. Thank you so much for having me on.
Absolutely. So you're the owner of 9 to 5 Freedom. Can't wait to learn what that is. And also a podcast launch coach. So I have to say, first time for me hearing of a podcast launch coach. So why don't you start there and let us know what the heck, maybe we'll call it PLC for short, but what is the podcast launch coach? What's your role in the podcast world?
Yeah. Well, first off, I like that PLC. I might have to steal that from you.
No worries. Put it after your name with a comma. People
Oh, there we go.
Yeah, you're awesome. They won't have any clue what that means.
Yep. I love it. So yeah, podcast launch coach. I help take people from, they have this idea, they have this message, like you mentioned, and they want to get that out into the world. And podcasting is a great way to do that. But there's so much involved with it. There's the tech side of it, there's the equipment, the software. And then if you really want the podcast to be successful, you really want to think about, like, what is my goal with the podcast?
Sure.
How do I achieve that goal or chase after that goal with a podcast?
Right.
So I kind of work with online coaches to guide them along that journey. We really drill into that message, the goal of the show itself, so that it's serving you and your audience. And then we ultimately get that podcast launched out into the world so you can start sharing your message.
It seems super intimidating for, I'm guessing, the average person. I still have this little aura in my life, whatever's left, where you tell somebody that you have a podcast and they're just like, wow, that's kind of cool. They don't know what to think. And then I say, oh, it's a business podcast. So then they're like, well, I was thinking you were, interviewing famous people and you were, doing all that. It sure seems like there's as many podcast topics and shows and ways to go to market. It's just, there's so many. So kind of start us at the beginning on that, Nick. If I'm listening right now and I'm an entrepreneur and I've listened to podcasts, but I haven't either been a guest on one or I haven't really thought about creating my own, what's kind of the first step in this process, would you suggest?
Yeah, first off, like I mentioned earlier, figuring out what is the goal. Why do you want to use the podcast? Is it to promote services that you already have or products that you have? Is it to build more authority and credibility in your industry? Or is it something that you want to do more just a hobby? It's something fun and enjoyable for you. After you've kind of figured that out, I would definitely go check out, try to get guested on other podcasts.
Okay.
So how I'm on your podcast right here.
Yeah.
This is a great opportunity to kind of get your feet wet, learn kind of how the flow of some of the conversations, especially if you can get on a podcast that's like kind of how you envision yours to be.
Sure.
And it can really help. I know when I started, I was terrified of starting my podcast. I was so nervous and so afraid. And if I gone on other podcasts before launching my own, I feel like it would have just completely made a world of a difference when I finally set to launch my own, because I had no idea what to expect.
So you bypassed going on other people's show and you went right to your own?
Oh yeah, I did so many things that I would do completely differently if I started over.
All right. How Not to Podcast by Nick Nalbach. Details at 5. So, but yeah, that's awesome. Well, and we love that. I mean, it's awesome to hear each week people's stories of what not to do. And then that makes what to do a lot more credible. So first tip for anyone listening, if you don't have your own podcast and you're thinking about it, I think it's a great way to jump on somebody else's show for a lot of different reasons. I've had some people on my show that have never been on a podcast before, and they were super, super nervous. And by the time they were done, they were so excited. And then by the time it launched, it was just fantastic for them. So any tips for that person? Where would I start? So let me ask it that way. If I realize that, yeah, you know what, I want to try it. The goal might be to get it off my bucket list. The goal might be to learn more about an industry, or the goal might be to actually potentially create my own podcast someday. Where do I start? Is there a website? Is there something I can Google? I mean, is there association? Where would you, Nick, suggest people start?
Yeah, so I've been a huge proponent of some of the new platforms coming out to connect guests with podcasters. And two of those, one I use almost every day, is called Podmatch.
Okay.
And you, regardless if you have a podcast or you just want to be on podcasts, you can set
Yep.
up a profile and they will actually match you with podcast or podcast guests that fit your criteria or what
Sure.
you're looking for.
Perfect.
And then another one that I'm a huge fan of is called Wildcast, and at gowildcast.com is the website. And it's kind of a similar deal. You set up your profile, you can go kind of searching around at the different podcasts that are there. And if any strike your fancy, something that's interesting to you, then you can go reach out and message them and say, hey, this is me, this is what I do. And if it all works well and you have a match, it's almost like online dating, but for podcast hosting guests.
Sure. Yep. Yeah. We do a lot of work with Podmatch. That's where you and I got connected. So I had to let my wife know early on that, hey, this is not a dating site. I'm not trying to figure out something while I'm married to you. So just full disclosure, it's Podmatch. I wish they would have did podcast match, but it is what it is. But I think it's a great place to start because you can start viewing shows. And, the other way that I like to think about it is if you have an interest outside of business, because if you're nervous about jumping into a business podcast where it might get technical and it might get over your head, so to speak, maybe find something that you're passionate about, a hobby or things like that. I mean, I don't really, oddly enough, I listen to business podcasts, Nick, but I don't listen to really any personal. Do you listen to personal podcasts that are non-business related?
If I'm not listening to business podcasts, typically it's somewhere in the comedy range,
Okay.
or I mean, I fall victim to the true crime podcast, like I don't even know the craze, if
Okay.
you will.
Okay. Well, so like, I mean, so that's it for people. There might be some people listening that aren't really familiar with it. So it's just really a collection of millions of different shows just like this, that sometimes air daily, sometimes weekly, sometimes monthly. But you can kind of search by genre, you can search by subject, you can search by person. I mean, you can really find pretty much anything out there in podcasting today, I'm assuming, correct?
Yeah, it kind of blows my mind, some of the different topics that are out there, like anything that's so like niche down that you think there's no way there's a podcast about that, and
Yeah.
a lot of times there's a podcast about it. There might not be many, but
Yeah.
there could be one, and anybody listening, like
Right.
you could end up starting that podcast. You could be the one of one podcast on that topic
Yeah.
and be like the go-to source for all that information.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So if you like knitting or if you like, any of that, I'm sure there's podcasts for all that stuff. And I just think it's so helpful to have primarily free and primarily commercial free information. So if I find a match on Podmatch, let's say, and I'm listening today and I'm thinking that I want to jump in this situation, do I then set up my free account, do whatever I need to do? And then if I remember, people start connecting with me asking me, hey, are you interested in being on my show? Is that kind of how that works at that point?
Yeah, so it works a couple different ways. One, Podmatch will actually send you suggestions.
Okay.
Even on the free account, they'll send you like 3 or 4 people or podcasters and say, hey, we think these podcasters are a good fit for what you're looking for.
Sure.
Feel free to message them. So then you
Sure.
can go reach out yourself. And then on the flip side, they're also getting like results sent to them. And it might say, hey, Dave would be an awesome fit for your show. He should be a guest on your podcast. Like, here's a way to reach out to him.
Sure.
So it works both ways where you could be messaging the podcaster or they could be
Gotcha.
messaging you.
Cool. Okay. And then if I'm really nervous about my topic, I mean, let's kind of unpack that a little bit. And let's say, I don't know, I mean, use a broad one, like I'm a sales professional and I want to get out there. I want to get whatever, I just want to get my feet wet a little bit. Do I then like just jump on Podmatch and look for sales type of podcasts and then niche down if I want to? I mean, what suggestions would you have once you get to that spot?
Yeah, I mean, I would listen to some of the podcasts ahead of time,
Okay.
kind of get a feel for what that show is about. I mean, you might be able to listen to an episode of it and think, holy cow, like this gets super technical, way beyond what I'm comfortable with talking
Yeah.
about.
Yeah.
And you might be able to rule that out right away. But it's always a good idea, regardless, just to familiarize yourself with the show that you're coming on prior to actually coming on, just so you'll know what to expect at that point.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, that's a great point. I think a lot of people miss that, Nick, because you get to understand a little bit about um the personality of the person that's asking the questions. You get to understand if it's more one-sided, how much talking do you really need to be doing, how long the podcast is. I mean, you asked me up front before we started today, how long's your podcast? And we normally run between 30 and 45 minutes depending on the topic, but there's some that are like 2, 3, 4 hour podcasts. It's like, man, if I would have said, Nick, we're going to be on here for about 4.5 hours, I could have just see, your jaw like, oh my gosh. Right. So, I mean, there's definitely some advantage of knowing what you're getting yourself into. So that's pretty cool. And I want to go back to why, I think the overarching purpose that a lot of people do this are the 2 words that you used was trust and credibility. And I think it's really helpful because when people, for whatever reason, if you write an article or you have a website or you are on a podcast, there's just a different level of trust and credibility that's there. So can you help us like understand, if I do it once, I'm not going to be automatically catapulted to the leader in my industry. How does this longevity thing work? Because that's, I think, where most people get burned out.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's where being clear with the goals up front comes in, and it's very important because, yeah, most likely, like most things in life, it's not going to be an overnight success. And I think where the credibility kind of comes into it, like it is a long-term game,
Yeah.
and people can recognize that it's a long-term game. I think it's very equivalent to like an author. If you go and write a book, there's something to be said about like, wow, this person put in a lot of time and effort to create this thing.
Right.
And sticking through with a podcast, especially for the long term,
Yeah.
like you can look at it and be like, wow, Dave has done how many episodes now? Like he put in work. Like
Right.
that guy has talked to amazing people. He's been doing it for a long time. Like there's like a level of like, wow, he did that. That's
Yeah.
credibility.
Yeah.
So I think for me, especially when I started getting into it, I was expecting like, okay, let's grow the audience. And as I got probably a year into it, I was like, okay, no, there's something more to this than just like me trying to build an audience. Like I'm seeing other benefits from this than just like monetary.
Sure. And that's where I think it's, I mean, I don't know, I don't really focus on numbers. I remember early on in my podcast that John Gordon is a huge author that I follow and great guy. And so I reach out to them and I say, hey, I'd love to have him on my show. And I was maybe, I don't know, 10 or 12 episodes in, and they said, well, we make it a policy. Thank you for reaching out. They were super helpful and kind. They said, we just make it a policy of not to, be on a podcast with less than 100 episodes. So all of a sudden, this 100 episode was like my next benchmark for me, and we hit it earlier this year, which was awesome. But what are the numbers? Do you know the numbers? Because there's like the vast majority of podcasts never hit a certain number. And I didn't know if you were up on the stats on that at all.
So I know the numbers have been slightly updated, but as of December of last year of 2021,
Okay.
I think there were like 2.4, 2.5 million podcasts,
Okay.
which sound like a decent amount.
Sure.
But of those, there was only like 23% that had published an episode in the last 90 days.
Wow.
So that's about 550,000.
Gotcha.
Which is not a lot at
Yeah.
all.
And I believe there was less than the number I remember. It was, I'm going to say less than 5% actually make that 100 mark. And I think it was really closer to 2%, but we'll give some, some grace out today. So roughly if you're in that, rare air of over 100 podcasts, it's pretty special. And I think that it was hard for me to look at 100 and think, oh man, how am I going to do this? And I was fortunate enough to have a producer. And so all I do is the easy stuff, So I want to flip that a little bit because we're going to assume, well, let me finish that other one. Once we are on somebody's podcast, that's usually where the hard work begins. It's not where like, whew, I'm done, Once I've been on a podcast, so let's say that I was on your 9 to 5 podcast, Nick, and I was in that spot where the episode's out or the episode got aired. What do you suggest for the guest then to maximize that benefit?
I mean, I kind of look at it, it's like if you got like a news spot or like a television spot, like if I got on TV, I'd be blasting that thing out to everybody. Hey, look at me. Like I'm on the news, like check that out. Like that's so cool.
Unless it wasn't for a good reason, right?
That's okay. We're fair.
Like you're a baseball player, so if you just got shelled for 12 runs in a third inning, you probably wouldn't be putting that on your YouTube channel. But anyway, sorry, just fun for an afternoon here. So
no, that is totally fair. I think that's the biggest thing is just promoting it. I mean, you're going on a podcast because you want to increase that credibility and that trust. And if you can kind of show people, whether that's putting it on your website or sharing it on social media, and it doesn't have to be a one and done thing, and it shouldn't be a one and done thing. Like just every once in a while be like, hey, I was appearing on Dave's podcast, like go check out our conversation because it was awesome. Or pulling out little clips, like just finding ways to help promote, because it's going to help you as the podcaster.
Sure.
Then it's going to help me as the guest, because if more eyes are getting on the episode, more eyes are also getting on me.
Right.
So it's kind of a two-way street there. And I think both can benefit very greatly from that kind of like collaboration.
Sure. So the goal would be for me to invest time and energy on the back end, getting that word out about your podcast that I was a guest on to whomever that's in my world. And then kind of the same is true. The unwritten expectation, I guess I want to say, is that you're going to, put this podcast out to all of your people. So me as your guest, if I was your guest, then you kind of have exposure to those people as well. Correct?
Yeah, absolutely. I can't remember what the exact quote was, but it was like business is like 20% like actual business, and then the rest is 80% marketing or something like that.
Sure.
And podcasting is very much the same. Creating the podcast is a part of it.
Yeah.
But the bigger part of it is promoting it and pushing it out into the world and getting people to find it.
Sure, absolutely. And as the bigger the pool gets, obviously the smaller you get. So that I'm sure you have a ton of marketing thoughts on that. But I want to kind of share one thing for me. It was May of 2020 when we started our podcast, so it was right in the midst of everything shut down. And, am a business coach, and fortunately a lot of my clients were whatever they call them, necessities, whatever, they could be open. So it didn't affect me nearly as much as it did a lot of people. But I remember in this situation, I'm at this, spot of, I want to do this podcast. And I thought everything shut down. And so I'm like, I just need to like talk to people. So I'm like, I was gonna do like a weekly coffee, with people that I didn't know, just meet and, do a coffee in person. Then the thing shuts down and I'm like, well, you know what? This Zoom thing is obviously working. So I'm going to try that. So I'm going to start talking to people and I want to pick their brain and see where they're going in life. So then I'm like, well, as long as I'm doing that, I might as well record them. Right. And I'm like, well, as long as I'm doing that, I might as well just do a podcast. And that's how it started. And I got to say, vulnerability for me, I started thinking in that first episode that I was going to like share with the world my wisdom. And I knew the 5 minutes into my first podcast, and I had my buddy Wayne Breitbarth from LinkedIn training. He's a massive LinkedIn trainer from Milwaukee. And I knew he was on my first show and he honored me with his presence. And 5 minutes into it, Nick, I knew that I was the one learning. So it started where it was going to be an outward thing, and it went inward so darn quick, where I was learning for myself and I was trying to help out other people. So I don't think that there's right or wrong goals to having a podcast or being a guest. Is that correct in your mind?
I love that you brought that up, and that's something I love to speak about, because a lot of times when you think of like a podcast or a podcaster, you're like, okay, well, they have to have all of this immense knowledge, they have to have all of this experience.
Yep.
And it can be very much the opposite. I went into the show, I had some experience, but it wasn't like I have all of this wealth to share with you.
Sure.
It was, I have a platform that I can bring experts onto and I can pick their brain.
Yeah.
If not for anybody else, for myself. So in a way, I can kind of go at it a little bit selfishly, but what I'm also doing is seeding myself in with all of these experts. So I might not be the go-to expert for Facebook ads or SEO or any of these topics. Like,
Right.
people are inherently going to associate me with some of these people that are experts.
Right.
But it's such a cool way to bring people on and ask questions you have.
Right.
And likely there's other people that have the same questions. So
Yeah,
it's a kind of a win-win-win.
Yeah, I was so like, trying to ask Wayne, because Wayne, he charges for his knowledge, which he should. That's how we make money. He was, gracious enough to give me 30 or 40 minutes of his time. So I'm like just trying to figure out how to make my LinkedIn profile the best it could be, you know? And I'm thinking there is nobody in the world listening to this. Who cares? I'm just here for myself. And, but again, it started really an inward way, in that way, where it was all about me. And now I'm realizing that every week I may not understand the topic fully. I may not be an expert, and I'm definitely not an expert in the vast majority of things we talk about, but I'm able to open up the discovery discussion, and all of a sudden stuff just comes out and you get calls. We've been on 6 of the 7 continents now with guests, and it's really cool because people are lining up to be on the show. And it's not that I'm anything, it's just that people think and see the value in that podcast venue moving forward as ways to give information out. So I think it's so cool. And again, if trust and credibility are important to you, which who isn't really striving for those 2 pieces, this just really adds that much more value to that. So I really appreciate you sharing that.
I think too, like when I started like the whole 9 5 to Freedom brand, and I was doing research, I was talking to some people, and it was like, okay, if you want to grow, you need to start putting yourself in a position with these people that are where you want to be at.
Right.
And it was like, okay, well, how do you get in that position? It's like, well, you approach them and you have to have something of value to offer.
Sure.
And from my standpoint, I was like, well, I don't have anything of value to offer. I'm just getting started. Like, what could I offer someone who's already 20 steps ahead of me?
Right. Sure.
And as soon as I got on started podcasting, it was like, that was the thing of value that I had. I had a platform for these other experts to speak on. So you find very quickly that it is possible to get people that you never would have thought coming on your podcast, like
Yeah,
it is a clear possibility now that
absolutely.
you have this thing of value. So
Yeah.
if that's holding you back, I would say definitely don't let it, because you can do it. That is
Yeah.
your like competitive advantage in a way.
Yeah, your mental thoughts are definitely, holding people back. I finally recently had a guest on that was on the Shark Tank. So it was, really cool to unpack that experience, so that's going to be airing here pretty quick. But I love that you bring that up, because it's so easy to limit our vision and limit our thoughts. And I since day one didn't want to know numbers, how many people are listening or how many downloads or whatever, however they judge this. And I'm thinking to myself, it's like when I wrote my book, and the day it came out, we published on Cyber Monday, or we released on Cyber Monday, and it immediately went to Amazon bestseller in 3 categories. My first call were to my parents, and I'm like, did you guys just like buy a ton of books, like fill a warehouse? I mean, even then I'm fighting this limiting thought process, It's just like, oh my gosh, you do this for a living and you fight this. I thought once I said I'm a consultant, that all stopped, but it just doesn't go away, But there probably are a lot of people listening right now, Nick, that are sitting there going, I can't do this. I'm no good. I'm this, I that. And that's why I wanted to take this so simple of jump on something like Podmatch, create a profile for free, and just start milling around. Or you don't even have to do that. Just start listening to podcasts and find something, type in whatever topic you want to learn more about, and then get creative and see if you can find ways to add value to somebody else's life. Because I don't know, I love every week being able to have these discussions. I learn something and other people learn something, and where's the lose in that, right? The end game is definitely a win-win.
When I started, I was I was very introverted. Like I didn't put myself in a position to build those kinds of relationships.
Sure.
And as I was getting through the interviews, it's like I actually enjoy meeting these people and
Yeah.
building genuine relationships. Like
Yeah.
sometimes it's okay, thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah.
Talk to you later, and you never
Yeah.
really hear from them again. But sometimes you build real connections and relationships with people, and that's pretty cool.
Absolutely. Yeah, we bought in products that have been on our show because we need it as a business owner. I even like, man, I need this. This is fantastic. I've done some weird stuff on the show, but it's just like you don't know unless you don't try. And so I think that's so cool. You used a word that I want to touch on here as we come in for a landing today, but you talked about branding, and I think it's really unique in that this is really a subtle but powerful way to brand. So you have the 9 to 5 freedom brand. So how are you using podcasting to brand that right now for you?
So what I like to really talk about on the show, obviously we get into some of the strategy side of things of building a business, but
Sure.
I was always really fascinated with the people who either left their 9 to 5 or were laid off, got fired, they quit, whatever, like that whole story,
Mm-hmm.
because there's a lot that happens in there, and
Yeah.
everyone's experiences is very different. And at one point or another, if you're just building a side hustle, like something on the side, or you are actively really trying to build something of your own, you're going to come to that point where you have to say, okay, I have to leave behind this stable, comfortable job to kind of put it all on myself
Yeah.
and do it. So I love hearing about those experiences, and the 9 5 to Freedom brand. When I started that was kind of a way to bring people along that journey
Okay.
of I'm working a 9 to 5 job and I'm working to get myself out of it. What is that all going to entail? So as I was learning new things, I started blogging, and then the podcast kind of introduced it. And I was able to start sharing the stories of people who are doing that and are pulling that off or have
Gotcha.
done it.
Yeah. Well, yeah, we do that too. Whenever there's that connection between business growth and personal growth, I love to ask that question. So I'm going to ask you that question. You were in corporate America, and then you transitioned into running your own business, owning your own business. Was it a gradual thing, or was it a wake up one morning and go, oh, this is crap, I can't do it anymore, I'm starting my own business? Which camp are you closer to?
It was closer to wake up, I can't do this anymore, I'm starting
Okay.
my own business.
Okay.
I didn't up and leave. I didn't say, okay, 2-week notice, I'm out, peace.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Now what am I gonna do here, honey? Guess what?
yeah, so in the actual execution of it was gradual, but the
Yeah.
idea, it was a book I read called The Millionaire Fastlane by MJ DeMarco. And in that book, he said, like, why would you like go to school, get the grades, get the career, and then ride that career out until retirement age, till you get to 64, 65, and bet on the fact that you are going to be healthy and able to enjoy the rest of the years of your life?
Sure.
And it was like, that right there was like a trigger to me. It was like, yeah, why would I? I don't know
Right.
what's going to happen in 40, 50 years, much less tomorrow.
Right.
So I need to start doing something now so I can be enjoying life now and not hope I can enjoy life several
Sure.
years down the road.
Wow, that's awesome. And so once you read that, it clicked, and then it was hard to run away from that thought, wasn't it?
Oh yeah, I couldn't escape. Like as soon as I read that, it was like, what are ways that I can make money online? Like I thought subscription boxes. I had tried doing stuff with my brother, like trying all these different things and just researching and looking, how do we build a business? How do we build a
Sure.
brand? Like what does this all entail? And I just got engulfed by the idea of entrepreneurship.
That's awesome. Well, and that's where, I mean, for you, there was something that wasn't fulfilling in your 9 to 5. And I try to point out as often as possible, we're not here to say you have to quit your job tomorrow or ever. There are plenty of people that are fulfilled in their 9 to 5 job, and they probably should stay in that job. I'm looking at the people that aren't engaged in their job. They're not happy in their situation, and they don't see any way out other than, the entrepreneur route. And like you said, people wait their whole life. I feel terrible when I look back at my dad's life, and, he'd work 50 weeks a year to get 2 weeks off. And then I look and see, oh, one time, we went to the Wax Museum in Springfield, Illinois. I'm like, my gosh, my dad lived 50 weeks for this, I mean, it was painful for me as an only child being there. It was painful for all of us, we didn't know. But no offense to Springfield. I know there's a ton of people down there listening. No offense to you guys. It's awesome. I just think that there's more to existence than working 50 weeks just to hone in on those 2 weeks of vacation that you're going to probably complain about the cost, or you're going to probably, there's something that derails it anyway. So I appreciate that. What are some tips to podcasters? We've been focusing on the actual person that was the guest, but as we look, I want to flip the mic, so to speak, and for people that are listening that are podcasters, what are a couple of tips that you see recently that you feel comfortable sharing with us?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, do some research, like start looking up podcasts. If you have an idea of something you'd like to start, or even if you don't have an idea yet, just start picking around, seeing what other podcasts are out there. See, like take note of what their cover looks like, how they structure the episode. Do they have a website? Like look at all these different aspects of the show and
Okay.
try to take as many detailed notes as you can, because you will learn a lot and you'll likely find similarities. And like all entrepreneur podcasts, a lot of them have a very similar looking cover to them, or
Sure.
they do a very much like interview style, kind of how we're talking right now.
Right.
You'll key in on certain things like that obviously have proved to be successful.
Gotcha.
And
Well,
then,
go ahead.
oh, I was just say that the next tip I would give is like start now. Don't wait until 4 years, 5 years from now when you think you're going to have an audience and people are going to care what you have to say. That was my mentality with it. It's like,
Sure.
I'm going to build the audience first and then I'll start the podcast.
Yeah.
And I spent probably a year or two not building the audience, and then just decided to launch the podcast, and that's been more beneficial than anything that I've done to this point.
So the Field of Dreams comment, which you're a baseball fanatic, so the drill. If we build it, they will come. I mean, do you buy into that, or do you have to go and get a bunch of people excited and then create the podcast? Which camp would you be in on your side?
So I don't believe if you build it, they will come.
Okay,
But I think if you don't build it, there's no reason for anyone to come.
sure.
So I would say start building it and use the tools at your disposal. Bring on guests. Go get on other podcasts because
Yeah,
that's a great way to, like we were talking, build your credibility, get people out there. It's going to get people aware of your podcast.
absolutely.
And yeah, like we said before, promotion's 80% of the game there. So don't be afraid to tell people like, "Hey, I have this podcast episode that I think you should go check out because
Yeah,
it was pretty awesome."
yeah.
We have to kind of hype ourselves up sometimes, but we're always so afraid to do so.
Yeah, especially you darn introverts, it's like, man, but I think
It's
it's
hard to be like,
funny.
"Hey, look at me."
Yeah, exactly. Right. Don't look at the camera. So yeah, and it's funny that you can tell some people that are on my show, they ask the question, are we doing are we doing this on video? And people get nervous on video, people get nervous on podcasts, but I always have to remind people, and I want to tell the audience this, that two great things is, number one, you can always hit the stop button. And so this isn't live TV. And that's where I've been on live TV. And man, they ask you a question and you don't know the answer. You don't have the ability to hit the pause button. And the second piece is, as you get better, if you tend to have less and less producing, editing that needs to happen. I mean, I had a problem at the beginning for myself. Nick, I would always be using filler words, and I'm better at it now, 100 and some episodes in. But boy, that first show, I'm like, and it's just like, man, dude. So fortunately, again, I listened to the raw, and then I listened to what my producer made. It sounded way better. So, there are ways around that. And I'm assuming you're experiencing the same thing with your clients too.
Yeah, and actually, it's funny you mentioned the filler words and stuff. I never was too bad with inserting the filler words, but I was really bad about leaving a decent amount of space. So, and it's easy enough to edit out,
Sure.
but the first couple episodes, especially, I would be editing and my episode would be like 60 minutes long.
Okay.
And when I'd pull out all of those gaps and those spaces in the episode would be like 50 minutes long. Like, holy cow, like
Yeah.
I am
Whoops.
talking so slow.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and that's a personality thing. And we do a ton of work with DISC, and there are certain people, they need to process, that information. And I'm the opposite. You're probably more ready, aim, fire, type of a person. For me, I fire at first, and then I'm like, oh crap, I should probably aim this gun and then get ready if I have time. But by then the bullet's out and the word's out and it's already gone. Right. So no right or wrong to it, just different perspectives. And I think those are great tips to be able to, help anyone thinking about podcasting. So a couple more questions. I'm gonna let you go. What do you feel is Nick Nalbach's tip of the week for anybody listening today, whether something we talked about or something not? What comes to your mind for a tip of the week for somebody?
I think the tip of the week, and this could go for podcasts, or anything really, is like be okay without with not being perfect, especially at the beginning.
Sure.
That was something when I started the podcast, I was looking at all of the podcasters who have been doing it for years and years. And I'm like, I need to produce that level
Yep.
of a show. And it doesn't make sense for me to think that I can do that when I haven't had that experience.
Sure. Wow.
One thing I like to bring up is like when we're younger, we're learning to do things. We don't think about it. We just go do it and we screw up a lot.
Right.
We figure it out, we learn it, we get better at it until it becomes something that we are good at. It becomes a skill that we have.
Right.
And for some reason, as we became adults, we became afraid to learn new things because we're now afraid of what people are going to think. When we're
Right.
kids, it's like we could fall over and not
Yeah.
care what anyone thinks.
Yep.
So I think
Yep.
we need to start thinking like kids again and be like, okay, this is probably not going to sound the greatest, or it's probably not going to be the greatest right now,
Yep.
but it's going to start and it's going to put me in that direction to create something that is awesome in the future.
Yeah, no, that's well said. And I think, I mean, it just go back to your childhood. You started with four wheels, and then you got your bearings about you, and then you went to three wheels, tricycle, and then you went to two wheels, but with training wheels, and then you went two wheels with one. And then if you were super good, you went to one as a unicyclist. But you had this progression, and very few kids were able to jump on a bike two-wheeler the first day and not skin their knee, and hopefully not hit their head on the concrete. But that's where I think it is really helpful to just jump in today, wherever you are. You don't have to be listening to the podcast where there's 500 episodes and it's brilliant and it's professionally done, and then you think about yourself, you'll never get there. So I remember trying to listen to some of the podcasts that were like the third episode, the second episode. What does that sound like? Because you go all the way back to mine, and there's a huge difference. And you're just about 100 episodes in on your end, aren't you?
Yeah, just pushing at the end of July, we'll hit episode 100.
Awesome. Congratulations. And I'm
Thank
sure
you.
that there were cool things that you've learned about yourself through that journey. So that's just really, I think the word for today is, to really experience this yourself. If, building trust and building credibility are important, this is really a seriously solid way to do this and try it. And, so I appreciate all your information. The last question is, Nick, what's one thing that most people listening wouldn't know about you that you feel comfortable sharing?
Ooh, that's a good question. So one thing about me, I actually used to ski jump. So like they do in the Olympics, and
Okay.
I wasn't quite to Olympic caliber. I wasn't as in it as some of the other people, but a lot of the people that I grew up with ski jumping with have
Okay.
actually competed in the most recent, like last two Winter Olympics. So
Wow.
that's pretty cool deal.
Congratulations. So then you were all over that, and I don't remember the country, so I'm not even going to say it, but I think I remember, but I don't want to mess anybody up. But there were women that were creating some kind of extra wind with their uniform or with their stuff. Were you involved? Did you remember that at all?
Yeah, I do remember that was a big deal.
Yeah.
So they like the suits, they have very strict rules on how loose and tight they can be.
Yeah.
And there was a huge controversy over it about like whether or not the altitude could affect like weight or any of that, where the suits were qualified and
Sure.
approved at the beginning are no longer qualified and fine, or were people like inflating them. Yeah, there was like a whole deal. Yeah.
Yeah, that's, leave it to human beings to come up with rather than practice more. I'm going to spend more time on how to screw the system than I'm going to,
Oh yeah.
it's just crazy, man. It's like, just, people spend more time on how to rob a bank and they spend more time to just, get a job. And it's just, oh my gosh, sorry. I'll get emails from people on that one. Thank you in advance for the emails. I apologize. So, but if you're listening and this kind of, it struck a chord with you, I encourage everybody every week, don't just jump onto your next podcast. Don't just put it away and think that was really good. Walk away with something that can make a small course correction in your life. Maybe it's jumping on Podmatch. Maybe it's listening to podcasts that are similar to something that you would have interest in. I don't know what that is, but I just don't want you to go back to what it was that you were doing and feel that, that hole there, because podcasting really fills an educational hole, a connection with somebody. There's some ego involved. There's just a lot of positives to it. So, Nick, if somebody wants to get in contact with you, they want to maybe learn more about some of the stuff that we talked about today, what's the best way for people to reach out to you?
So I have been very active, especially podcasting related content on Instagram.
Okay.
At 95free is the handle. It's all spelled out, because I like to confuse everybody with spelling out numbers.
No, it's good.
And then if like I do have podcasting resources on my website as well, and that's
Okay.
at 95tofreedom.com.
Awesome. So cool. Well, thank you again so much. And hey, I'm putting it out there publicly that I'd love to be a guest on your show. So, I don't know if I have any value, but for me, if I don't know the answer, I just make stuff up as I go. So
Hey,
it really sounds like I know what I'm talking about, but if anyone ever actually makes that recipe, it ain't going to taste good. So
hey, part of it's just sounding like you know what you're talking about. You don't always have to
exactly.
have the answers. Yeah.
Exactly. And you got the mic going, you got the headphones. I mean, you look like you got it all together. So thank you again so much, Nick, for hanging out. And again, I just want to encourage the listener today, don't just jump onto your next task. Think of one thing that you learned from this last 40 minutes or so and do something with that so that in a week from now, you can look back and go, man, that was awesome. Nick really helped me. And that's why we're here. So until next week, thank you. And thank you, Nick, so much for hanging out with us and sharing with us all your info.
Yes, Dave. Thank you so much. This was a blast.